Okay, we're going to talk about virtual hard disk files now, specifically creating them. When you create a new hard disk file, you're going to be prompted to choose the file type. Now, the native format for VirtualBox is the VirtualBox disk image format, or the VDI. Do not confuse this with Virtual Desktop Infrastructure, which we will talk about later. This is a virtual drive format. Basically, this is a file in your file system that the hypervisor uses to store, and actually to not, I forget the accord, to store whatever is on that hard drive. So it'll be a file or a set of files with a bootable drive image in it. All the settings, all the programs, everything, all the packages you install if it's a Linux box, all the users, the whole 9 yards. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to choose the size and location of that virtual disk. The default name of the disk file will be the same as the VM. You can choose an alternate name and save the location if you want to. Say, for example, you don't want to store it in the VM's directory. As I showed you in the demo, the VirtualBox will store its images, its machines in one place, whereas VMware will store them in another, in a directory called virtual machines in the Windows user's home directory. The VM will the hypervisor will create the VM, and then you'll put the VM in the VirtualBox manager. Now, one thing to note here: if you get the name of the virtual machine wrong and change it, you can't change the name of the file that belongs to that virtual machine. You'll break things. I tried that myself. You actually can see that in another one of my demos. I created a VM not thinking about what I was installing. I gave it the name of one Linux distro when it was actually a slightly different one, and I wanted to fix that. And I I changed the name of the VM, then I tried to change the name of the file. And try as I might, I couldn't get the renamed file associated with the renamed VM. I actually had to go back in and change the path to the file back to the original name in order that the VM would recognize it. So it'll kind of look like this. So you've got some options. You've got your VDI, you've got your VMDK, which is your virtual machine disk, which is your VMware format. Your VHD is a virtual hard disk, that's Hyper-V. HDD is a parallels hard disk. So you can actually create VMs in VirtualBox that you can move over to other hypervisors, QEMU and others. QEMU, Parallels, VMware, Hyper-V. Now, you might have to do some more work going back the other direction. VirtualBox and VMware both understand the open virtualization format quite well. So you can move VMs between VMware and VirtualBox with relative ease. It's going to be a little bit harder to get things in and out of the Hyper-V space. And the last step will be, of course, to decide how it's allocated. This is an important consideration. On the desktop, particularly if you don't have a whole bunch of extra space, I would strongly suggest dynamic allocation. In VMware terms, this is called thin provisioning. The file will only be as big as it needs to be to hold the amount of data that is actually in that virtual machine. The fixed size, what is called thick provisioning in a VMware context, will actually earmark the entire the full size of that drive, that virtual drive. So if you tell it you've got 100 gig drive for some VM that you're building, because it might need 100 gigs down the road sometime, what it's going to do with a fixed size, or in VMware terms, thick provisioning, it's going to earmark all 100 gigs of that. You'll lose all that space, and you might find it difficult to dial that back. So unless you have now there's a trade-off here. With dynamic allocation, it is going to be a little slower. because as the image grows, it's going to have to claim new files and initialize those spaces, those sectors of the hard drive, and then give them away to the VHD and give them a new format, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, with fixed provisioning, it's going to do all that work up front. And you also know exactly how much space you have to work with. You can't possibly run out of space um, by uh, by getting yourself into by going too far down the route we call VM sprawl. With VM sprawl, you basically create too many virtual machines, more than you can manage, more than you can support on the hardware. With a fixed disk, you make sure that can't happen because you give each VM all the space it can use right off the bat, and you decide, okay, I'm going to make sure I can't run out of hard drive space by spinning it all up front. Now, so these are things you have to think about as you're building these VMs. Next thing I'm going to do is talk about our basic virtual machine functions. That'll be the next video.